Hey everyone, welcome to my new tutorial. Today we are going to make this cute UFO animation and I really hope you will enjoy this one, and if you do, please don't forget to leave that like. And if you're new to the world of 3D and Blender and you want to learn in the most effective way, be sure to check out my courses. I carefully designed them to take you from beginner skills through stylized and low poly illustration all the way to full character illustration in the shortest time possible. So if you're interested, please check out the link in the description. Now let's jump right into empty Blender file and let's delete the cube and the light here. We'll leave the camera in place, so let's select those, press X and choose delete. Now let's press Shift A and we'll start with the circle. We will create that UFO right here, so let's enter 24 vertices. That should be enough, and I think the scale is okay, so let's tab into the edit mode and press E then Z to extrude on the Z axis just a tiny bit, and now press F to fill and I to inset just like this, and let's press G then Z and move this up slightly, and now press E to extrude and S to scale. And now we can help ourselves with some bevel, so let's press Ctrl B and create the bevel like this and increase the number of segments with the mouse wheel just like that. And now let's go for edge select by pressing 2, alt click this loop right here, press G twice to slide it down a notch, and additionally we can alt and shift click this loop right here and press Ctrl B again to create yet another bevel, so we have some more smooth result right here. And right now we can press Ctrl R, create a new loop down here, press 3 for face select, alt click this loop, press E then Z twice and move this down to create a tiny little detail. And now I want to have some lights here, but before we continue, let's use some mirror modifier. So let's go to the modifiers panel and let's add mirror modifier, and we'll disable X and enable Z axis, so we have something like this in place. And now additionally we can hold period on a keyboard to switch to the 3D cursor, and let's press A to select all and S then Z to scale this on Z axis to flatten it out a little bit like this. Now let's make sure we hit period on a keyboard again, switch back to medium point, and now let's tab out and let's press Shift A and we'll add another circle. And now let's just use 12 vertices right here and tab into the edit mode. Let's look from the top, and now I will enable X-ray view right here and press S to scale this down and press G then X to move it aside. I want to create these lights around the saucer, so let's rotate this a little bit and press G then Z and move this up. Now let's switch for vertex select by pressing 1, press E then Z and extrude, press S to scale and F to fill. That should be enough for just one light. And now let's disable the X-ray view, and before we duplicate this, let's make sure it sits well with the model, so let's press A to select all, press G then Z and move this down. Now let's look from the top by pressing 7 on a numpad again, and let's choose the spin tool right here and let's just do a spin like this, and we'll finish up right here. First of all, let's check use duplicates, and now let's go -360 and we'll leave the steps to 12, so that should be just fine. But here there'll be a duplicate one, so let's press A to select all, press M and merge by distance. That will get rid of the duplicate vertices right here, and now we have some lights all around. We can tab out now and let's hold Shift and select the UFO and press Ctrl J to join. And now we can go into the modifiers panel and let's add some bevel modifier, and let's increase the number of segments to 2, and let's reduce the amount to something like this, so we have some smooth edges and some supporting loops. And now we can press Ctrl 2 to add subdivision modifier. You can see it right here with 2 levels of subdivision, right click and shade smooth. And this will be everything in terms of the UFO model. We'll keep it really simple, so let's press G then Z and move it up like 2 meters or something like that, and let's press Shift A and we'll add a plane. Now let's tab into the edit mode, let's switch back to the selection tool and let's press S to scale this up. Now let's tab out now, let's look from the front, press G then Z and move this down. Now let's hit 0 on a numpad to look from the camera view, and additionally we can press N, and in the view panel right here we can check camera to view. So now we are able to use our viewport controls to control the camera, and let's go to the output settings and let's switch the resolution to something like 1600 to 1200. and let's move it around maybe a little bit more from the top. So I'm using the middle mouse just like with the viewport right here, and I think something like this should be just fine. Don't forget to uncheck this so you get to control your viewport again. And now let's collapse this panel with pressing N. And now I want this cone of light go from the UFO, so let's press Shift A and we'll add another circle, and let's enter something like 24 here. Tab into the edit mode, let's press S to make it smaller, and let's tab out and press G then Z and move it up. We want the origin point to be up there. And now let's look from the front, and we can enable wireframe view, and let's tab into the edit mode, press E then Z to extrude this down, and let's press S to scale, so something like this should be okay. And now let's press Ctrl R and add few more loops using mouse wheel, and that will just take care of the shading for us. So let's switch back to the solid view and tab out, right click and shade smooth. So you should have something like this in place. And now we are almost ready for the animation. There's just one last thing, because I want this to be moving around, you know, in a little bit of a hectic way, and also be turning around, but I want this cone to be quite static but bound to the movements of the UFO. So I will add a dummy object right here. So with the UFO selected, let's hold Shift S and snap cursor to select it, and let's press Shift A and we'll add an empty, and we can use the arrows. They'll make it clear that this is some empty object that's used for the controlling of the UFO, and you can go to the axis settings and increase the size if you want, so it's better visible. And now let's select both of those objects by holding Shift, and let's select the empty as last, press Ctrl P and parent to object. So now we are able to move everything here, but we are able to rotate and control the UFO separately, which is very handy in this case. So let's configure the animation right here. And first of all, I want to have like 120 frames of animation, and in the output settings let's set this to 30 FPS, so they'll give us like 4 seconds of animation, which should be plenty. And let's now scrub to something like frame, let's say 30, or yeah, let's say 40, and let's make sure we have the empty selected, and let's hit N for the side panel again, and on the location Y-axis we'll right click and insert single keyframe. So that means on the frame 40 the location of this empty will be right here. And now we can go to the frame 1, press G then Y and move it away like this. And now let's right click and insert single keyframe here again. And right now we can select the keyframe on the frame 40, press Shift D and duplicate it to something like frame 80 or even 90 maybe. And now let's scrub all the way to 120, press G then Y and move it away. And let's again right click and insert single keyframe. So the UFO will fly in, it will hover in this place for a while and then fly away. And now we'll need to take care of that movement, because now if you play it, it's, you know, a little bit rigid, a little bit static, doesn't look so pleasant. So let's hit Ctrl Tab, hovering over the timeline here, so we are able to switch to the graph editor. And here you can hold Ctrl and use middle mouse button to scale this up and down, zoom in and out and stuff like that. And basically this is the curves that describes the movement, and we need to make this, you know, more actionable. So let's select the first keyframe and let's just click and drag this handle to create a shape like this. So the UFO will fly in with a lot of speed and really ease out the movement as it slows down, so it will look like this. And that's a little bit more realistic with high-speed objects, and we can even exaggerate it a little bit more because this is, you know, stylized and cartoonish animation. And right here it will fly out, so it can accelerate a little bit, but it should be more rapid. So maybe something like this, where it really starts to move and then flies away. And we can maybe select this keyframe, press G then X and move it to that frame 80. I think that will be quite okay, because we have quite a lot of easing into this movement. So we can move this handle all the way right here, and there will be that subtle movement in the beginning, and it will fly back in a second. So that's the basic movement, and now we can create some movement for the actual UFO. And since this is just parented to those axes, we can do whatever we want right here. So let's first create some Z rotation. I will right click and insert single keyframe on a frame 1, and that will create that single keyframe right here. You can see the Z rotation channel right there. And let's press Shift D and press X and move it to the other side all the way like this, so we have that keyframe right here. And now we'll just move it up 360 units, in this case 360 frames. So let's press G, then Y and 360 and let it enter to confirm. If you want to see the animation, press A to select all keyframes and hit period on a numpad to focus on that animation. But I don't want this to be easing, I don't want any acceleration or deceleration, so with all of these selected, press T and choose linear. That will make this just a straight line like that, and the UFO will rotate for the length of the animation. So that's the secondary movement, and now let's create some tertiary movement, you know, some wobble there. So let's insert some X and Y rotation on the UFO as well. So let's go to the frame 1, right click and insert single keyframe for X, and now let's select the channel right here. And if you don't see this panel right here, make sure you hit N for the side panel on the graph editor as well. Go to the modifiers and let's insert some noise. And now for the scale, let's enter something like 15. That will make it a little bit more spread out. And for the strength, something like 0.15 to have some really subtle movement right here. But you will see it wobbles a little bit. And now we can restrict the frame range, so we can loop this no problem. So let's start at frame 1 and end at frame 120. And now let's use 15 frames to blend in and out right here. And now we'll do the same for the y-axis. So let's go to the frame 1 and right click and insert single keyframe. Let's select the Y rotation channel, and in the modifiers we'll add the same noise with the same scale of 15 and strength of 0.15. If you want something different, you want to play with this a little bit, that's totally fine. You can just go ahead and try different values, you know, for the wobble. But right now we'll have some, you know, wobbly movement like this. And now what I want to happen when the UFO flies in, I want this cone to expand. So, and first of all, I want to find the frame where the cone will have its, you know, full size, so it will be extended. So something like frame 45. And let's hover here in the viewport, press I and insert scale. And now we'll scrub all the way to frame 35. And let's press S, then 0 and confirm. And we'll hit I again and insert scale. So they'll create the animation. It's really subtle here because it's between 0 and 1 on the scale. And from the rotation before, we have 100 and 200 here on the Y scale. So let's press period on a keyboard to focus on our animation here. And basically this will just extend this from that origin point at the top to its full size like this. And let's play it back. And it's a little bit slow, so we can make it more dramatic, but make sure you select all of these keyframes by dragging the selection around them and then grab all of those handles like this, so we get some more sudden movement. And now let's hold Ctrl and middle mouse button to zoom this out a little bit, and let's move it to the side and let's duplicate this. So let's select both of those keyframes, let's scrub to frame 80 and press Shift D to duplicate them and press X to lock them on X-axis. Move it like this, and now let's select just this one here, press G then X and move it away, and we can adjust the handles right here. So the UFO flies in, extends the cone, retracts and flies away at speed. So that's the basic of the animation, and let's now play with some shading. And I want this to look like, you know, really black and white retro science fiction shot. You can even later add some post-production effect like grain, you know, to make it really, to make this look really hazy and grungy. But for now, let's just create some basic black and white scene. So first of all, let's go to the render settings, and I will enable ambient occlusion, bloom and screen space reflections for the EV previews and for the cycles. Let's enable GPU and some denoising, and I will use optics for rendering. And for the performance, I'll reduce the tiling to 512. And for the max samples on the render, I will go something like 64 they'll make it like 2 or 3 seconds per frame. That's doable for the preview animation. Then when I'm satisfied, I can ramp it up. And now let's press Ctrl B and limit the render preview only for the camera bounce. And let's hold Z and switch to the rendered preview. And that should be pretty dark here. So let's insert some lights. And first of all, this cone itself should be a light. So let's go to the material preview, hold Z. And now let's expand this and let's switch to the shader editor right here. And let's create a new material and let's call this light. And now we'll delete the principled shader, press X, and let's press Shift A and we'll add a vector and mapping node. And then let's press Shift A and we'll add input and texture coordinates. And now let's plug in the object into the vector right here. And now let's press Shift A and we'll add a texture and we'll insert the gradient texture. And let's plug in the vector right here. And now make sure you have the Node Wrangler add-on active. If you don't, just go Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and search for Node Wrangler and just check the box right here. And then you can Control Shift and click the gradient texture to see the gradient. And let's look from the front by pressing 1 on a numpad. So let's use the Y rotation here and let's rotate this minus 90 degrees. And you can see the black is up there. And now we can scale it a little bit. So let's scale it on a Z-axis so it goes a little bit lower like this. And now we have our gradient. So let's press Shift A and we'll add a shader and a mix shader. And let's connect it right here, but we want to plug this into the factor. And let's keep this connected into the surface. That's quite okay. So let's press Shift A and we'll add another shader and there'll be the transparent. And let's plug it right here. And let's press Shift A and we'll add a mission shader and we'll plug that into the other input of the mix shader like this. And now if you want to preview this in Eevee, you will need to go to the material settings, viewport display, and enable blend mode to alpha hashed or alpha blend. And now you will see what's actually happening. You can see this is transparent at the top and it's not what we want. So let's switch these shaders right here and this should be more like it. So now we can play with that scale again. Let's look from the side and let's decrease that scale a tiny bit so we have more transparency at the bottom. Something like this. And yeah, now we have our cone and we can increase the strength of that emission to something like 5 if you want. Let's look from the top and we can enable scene lights and scene world for the Eevee preview. And now if you hold Z and go for rendered, you will see that emission happening right here. And now if you play back the animation, let's go back to the timeline here and we can collapse this. You will see it retracts and flies away. And it all works nicely and we have that nice feathering down there from that gradient mask. So now we can hold Shift S and snap cursor to world origin. Let's press Shift A and we can create a new light and we can insert the area light. Press G then Z, move it up and let's switch the shape to disk. Let's make it a little bit larger and insert the power of something like 500. And we can press G then Shift Z to lock it on X and Y axis and move it around our scene to create some interesting light. Some nice backlight like this. And now let's select the background and let's create a new material and let's make it darker. And now let's select the UFO. We can create a new material there as well and we can make it metallic and reduce the roughness a little bit. And you know, if you want, now you can put in some trees and maybe something that gets kidnapped by the UFO. So here is the space to, you know, put something in there and make it animate flying up and reducing scale to 0, similar as with the cone. So whatever you put in there, whether it's sheep or a cow or a tree or something like that, you can just animate its movement up and reducing the scale so it will look like it gets kidnapped. And before you render, don't forget to go to the render settings and enable motion blur. That's really important. And then in the output settings, make sure you pick your folder right here, switch from PNG to FFmpeg, and for the encoding I tend to use MP4, and then just go render animation, wait out your frames and you will have your animation ready. So that's it for today's animation. I really hope you enjoyed this one, and again, if you did, please leave that like, and if you're new around here and you enjoy tutorials like this, please hit that subscribe. Thank you all for watching and have a wonderful day.